I've not used this before, so I'm just trying it out.
Hey man, it's been too long since we sat down and that just feels wrong. Allow me to give my head a shake, open my eyes and fix a mistake. Do you wanna come over? Just like the old times, we'll hit pause and then hit a rewind. You wanna come over? Just like the old days, and we'll watch the time just fly. Hey buddy, no strangers here. These times I hold them dear. My door's open, so come on in. This was great, let's do it again. Do you wanna come over? Just like the old times, we'll hit pause and then hit rewind. You wanna come over? Just like the old days, and we'll watch the time just fly. Do you wanna come over? Just like the old times, we'll hit pause and then hit rewind. You wanna come over? Just like the old days, and we'll watch the time just fly.
Space Commander.
Full force. How are you, Space Commander? My cadet hat is ready to go. It's early morning in Australia, so I have the biggest cup of coffee that I could possibly make. Now, we've had a few guests before, haven't we, Space Commander? We've had Sergeant Slaughter, which was on my request, being my childhood hero. We had Bob Breakin, which was upon your request. However, we today have a guest with us that you have been very vocal about having on our show. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this guest that we're about to bring on?
Yes, there's a gentleman who's been involved in publishing several books, some that are already out, some that are coming up, having to do with Palitoy Action Force. As you know, a subject dear to my heart. So
of course.
Hopefully we're going to learn some new things today.
Well, without further ado, let's bring on Brian, the guest of honor. How are you today, sir? Full force.
Full force, guys. How you doing?
Good, buddy. Good.
Help me on.
We're happy to have you on. Like I said, I don't know a lot about Action Force. Everything I do know, I know because of this man, Space Commander, this side of me. But yeah, for all I know, it could be wrong. I don't think he's wrong. He dresses the part, so he must know a little something.
He does look the part, all right.
Thanks for joining us, Brian. Absolutely pleasure to meet you. Tell us a little bit about these projects that you've been working on. You know what? Before we get to the projects, tell me a little bit about your history or childhood history, if you have any, of Action Force.
Well, you know, I was before I discovered Action Force, I was a big Action Man fan. I can remember one Christmas we had me and my brother came down. And I can't even remember what age we were, but we were quite young, you know, maybe 6, 7 at the oldest. And when we came down around the Christmas tree, all the Action Man gear was out of the packaging and set up, which blew our minds. So we had the Scorpion tank, we had the Jeep, we had the motorcycle and sidecar, the helicopter, the armored car, and all those vehicles all had figures with them.
Wow. So actually, and these are the larger scale figures, right? The big guys.
12-inch. So for, your 12-inch G.I. Joes, for people in America, that's how they would know them. But they were Action Man in the UK and Ireland. It was Action Man. So then I had older cousins, and they had like loads of kind of Action Man figures, or the Steve Austin $6 Million Man, action figure. so it was kind of started in that space, you know, as a playing with toys. You know, that was kind of the first, really say, action figure that I played with. But and of course we had loads of the you know, the Airfix 1:32 scale soldiers.
Oh yes.
I had older cousins, they had huge armies of them, and my older cousins, like they would have been teenagers at the time. They had them all painted up, like looking really, really great. Whereas we were too young, we never painted ours. But it was kind of like a treat, you know, maybe like you know, once a month, my dad would take us to a local newsagents that sold, like we would say, the box of soldiers, and you would get, you know, they always looked more premium than your typical really cheap Green Army men that you could get for, like, you know, 30p or whatever. They came in the box, they were still on the sprues, and you had to take them out, and they just looked really, you know, the sculpt on them was much more detailed. And of course the box artwork for those action or Airfix soldiers as well was amazing. So we had, you know, we had a lot of them growing up as kids. Where Action Force kind of got on my radar, I can remember there was a TV commercial for Action Force at the time where a kid walks into a toy shop and the shopkeeper is all like a sergeant major and stuff. But I never saw those toys on the shelves. So I mean, I was familiar with the TV commercial, but never saw any actual products. Like where we lived was kind of out in the suburbs. There weren't many toy shops near us. If it was in the local newsagents, that was really the only shop that we could spend our pocket money in. So I remember there was one particular day, a guy on my street was you know, he was playing outside and he had this action figure, the same size as a Star Wars figure, and I was familiar with the Star Wars toys, but it was a modern military look. He had a removable cap. It had the radio backpack with the headphone piece that, you know, he could wear, and he could hold his rifle with two hands because the arm was, you know, one arm was bent. And I thought, this is amazing. This is even better than Star Wars figures. I've never seen anything like this. And I said, you know, I asked him where he got it, and he said it's free with a comic in the local newsagents. And I thought he was lying because I said, how could something awesome be free with a comic? But, you know, he insisted that it was free. I thought he was playing a practical joke on me. But just to play it safe, I went straight up to the newsagents, and there was Battle with the free figure. It was the Z-Force radio operator, 30p. And I spent the easiest pocket money I ever spent, and I took that comic home. And I was familiar with Battle anyway, because again, my older cousins would have like Battle or Warlord or Victor lying around, and when we would visit, I would read those comics. But now I bought my first copy of Battle. I got the free Z-Force figure, so I was immediately hooked as an Action Force fan. And I began to slowly build up a small, you know, modest kind of Action Force collection then over the next, you know, few years. And of course, I got the newsagent to order Battle in for me every week. And I collected that probably up till the run finished in late 86. And then at that stage, I kind of moved over to 2000 AD at that stage. So that's my kind of, you know, whirlwind, quick capsule kind of introduction into Action Force.
That's great. I was talking to Space Commander last week, and I was asking him whether or not Action Force had the same impact locally as G.I. Joe seemed to have globally, as in, you know, were the kids of your surrounds really super into this action figure line, or is it like just a few kids here and there?
It was, for me, my recollection, it was only a few kids here and there, you know. And I can't put my finger on why that is, you know. It's but there wasn't that much. Even like when we were, you know, me and my brother, my younger brother, would play with our soldiers or our action men, you know, pre-Action Force. There weren't even that many people, you know, into them. And when the Star Wars kind of figure craze hit,
yeah,
and it is certainly, I couldn't think of anybody in my school, bar maybe one or two kids in school that collected the toys. It certainly, you know, it seemed to, most guys were into sport, you know. Liverpool were the big football club at the time, and they were all crazy about Liverpool, and a lot of the toy stuff kind of just went over their heads, you know.
I do remember that commercial you were talking about. I didn't see it as a kid, but Space Commander sent me down a rabbit hole of some Action Force commercials, and I've got to say, I really like them. And I like them because they don't dumb it down. They make the kids feel like they're important, and it has a certain level of urgency and importance to them. Like, this is something for you, made for you, but it's not, we're not going to dumb it down or kiddie it up. It seemed like, yeah, I guess the word on top of my head is that it does feel as if it was important to the kids watching and important to the people that were making them, that, you know, this isn't a child's toy. This is, you know, top stuff.
Yes. And, you know, I think partially, a big part of that is because Palitoy would have had a lot of experience with TV advertising. I think they kind of got into the TV advertising. They introduced it into their marketing with Tressie back in the 1960s. And, you know, by the time that the 1980s ads were coming out, Palitoy's advertising had gotten very sophisticated, you know, like in terms of, they knew who their market was and they knew how to talk to that market. So right. I think that's probably a big part of why they resonate so strongly with the kids.
So, Space Commander, have you got any follow-up questions? Did I miss anything important before we dive into the project stuff?
No, I was just, I think it's fascinating that it sounds like the three of us in different areas of the world all grew up in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it's true. So I actually grew up in outback Australia, and the place where I was getting most of my toys and most of my action figures was a local newsagent's. And if they didn't have it, we didn't get it, basically. But yeah, G.I. Joe was a bit bigger with my friend circle, that everyone seemed to be really into it. Comic books as well. So it wasn't until later high school days I had to sort of like hide my collecting habits. So Brian, Space Commander did send me down another rabbit hole of checking out your website and checking out the books that you've done. Before we do talk about Action Force, I did notice there was a little bit of Star Wars happening there too.
Oh yeah, well, you know, Star Wars is it's another kind of toy line that's very kind of close to my heart. Like I said before, Action Force, you know, we had the Star Wars toys, and again, like we didn't have massive collections growing up as kids, but what we did have, you know, was important to us, and we got so much enjoyment and fun out of it. But that particular Star Wars project that you're mentioning there, that's something that I've been working on for, oh God, I mean, probably nearly 10 years, you know. I mean, certainly going back to 2017 is when I actually started work on it. But the thinking about it prior to that probably goes back another couple of years.
Right.
And for people who aren't familiar with it, what that is it's using the vintage Star Wars toys to recreate the entire original trilogy. Insofar as is physically possible, because there's a lot of scenes, a lot of shots in there that were, say, like the Rebel Fleet Trooper in that kind of opening sequence. You know, Kenner never made that, so that's a scene that I couldn't directly kind of recreate that. But things like the Star Destroyer chasing the Tantive 4, that kind of shot, you know, R2 and C-3PO in the Tantive 4 kind of corridors, Leia giving the Death Star plans to R2-D2, all those kind of different shots. Right up to the Emperor's arrival, you know, the Battle of Endor, some of the space battles. It's over 120 scenes from the original trilogy movies, recreated with the vintage toys. So it's a huge labor of love. It's a massive project. And there's a link to it from the Total Toy Books website where people can kind of read a digital copy for free. You just click through the link and you can read it. But one of my goals would be to find kind of I suppose a publisher with a Star Wars license that would take that book on and publish that. Or if I can never manage to get a Star Wars license myself, I could publish it myself. But because it tells the story of the original trilogy so faithfully, it will be a very, you know, if I released it, it would be an infringement on Lucasfilm's IP. So
right, yeah, Disney now on the helm of that would make it very difficult to get any sort of official license from for Star Wars. That's not the case, though, for your Action Force books, where you are official license for Hasbro.
Yes. Well, so what we have here is I mean, Space Command is holding up the total Action Force, the battle years, and this is a kind of a passion project that kind of grew out of the COVID lockdown, and I've got a complete collection of the Battle Action Force comics, and during lockdown, I decided I was going to read those comics, and there's one there, yeah, the very first kind of issue of Battle Action Force from October.
Base has got props.
So what happened was that as I was reading the comics, I realized, we've got these great creators like Jerry Finley Day, top British comics writer, very well known in the British comic scene. But I would rarely hear Action Force fans ever kind of mention him or give him credit for his amazing work. Like, he's the guy who invented the phrase "blood for the barn." That's
so?
Very Finley Day. And he brought to life so many of the Action Force toys in comic format. He's basically he's the equivalent of Larry Hama in the G.I. Joe universe. And the G.I. Joe fans, they all know and love Larry.
Of course.
In piece there. But you don't hear the same enthusiasm amongst Action Force fans for our comic creators in the Action Force universe. So one of the big motivators for that particular book was to spotlight all the different creators, both on the toy side and on the comic side related to Action Force. And in the process of doing that, we got to tell a great story about the toys themselves, how they were created. Look at that, the Palitoy team there. What an awesome team.
Oh, yeah.
And, and then showcase some really nice photography and some comic artwork. But to be able to make the book happen, we needed to get permission from Rebellion to use the comic artwork, because Rebellion owns the Battle comic, all of the Battle Action Force artwork and strips. They own all of that. But of course, Hasbro owned the intellectual property of the trademark Action Force. So I had to bring both parties together to be able to get the permission to do that book. And we had the book, Paddy had done the writing and David had kind of written the comics history. I'd done all the design and photography. So we had it ready to go. We just needed to lock in the permissions. And, it took a little bit of legwork, but we got the sign off from Hasbro. We got the sign off from Rebellion. And once we had that, we could go ahead with the project. And that was, it was great for that book, but it also kind of laid the groundwork for future projects that came after that. So that was really cool.
Did you get any pushback from either side, or were they happy for you to go ahead with this project?
There was no real pushback. I mean, I was very transparent about, what we were planning to do. Obviously, in any kind of licensing deal, there's obviously terms and conditions that you have to comply with. And, so again, very happy to kind of to roll in with the terms and conditions of both parties. So,
yes, of course.
It's just, straightforward kind of doing business. There's nothing really for me to push back on. Once I know what the terms are, great, I can go with the terms. And then, of course, we're able to make the whole project happen then.
That must have been an exciting moment where one of your passion projects gets not only the tick of approval from two major people responsible for bringing Action Force out there. Hasbro later on, obviously, Palitoy coming before that. I only know that because of Space Commander. But then it's sort of taken off with G.I. Joe fans as well. I've seen a lot of the G.I. Joe collectors having a look at this book and being very excited for what's coming out, and all the information that some of us didn't already know, and were pleased to see that there was such a rich history before Hasbro sort of put their feelers onto it.
That is one of the important aspects of both the Total Action Force, the Battle Years, and Volume 2, is to really kind of pull back the curtains and reveal some of, some kind of important key facts about Action Force. And a lot of this stuff I only discovered myself when we were kind of researching and putting the books together. But you know, the fact that Action Force was being developed in parallel with GI Joe, but neither Hasbro nor Palitoy knew that one was working on or the other was working on these kind of, you know, similar projects, even though they were long-term kind of business partners, in that Palitoy was a client of Hasbro. So they had the license for GI Joe, but they didn't know that Hasbro were redeveloping this kind of, you know, 3 3/4 scale GI Joe. But at that time, remember Action Man, when the 12-inch GI Joe was not performing very well and might have even been discontinued, Action Man was still thriving over in the UK.
Right.
And the royalties being paid by Hasbro or by Palitoy to Hasbro were keeping Hasbro in business throughout the 70s.
Wow.
That's something I didn't know until I was working on the My Palitoy storybook with Bob Breakin, which is...
I have one of those here.
Here's another prop.
I was going to ask you, you mentioned the volume 2. This one obviously based very much on Palitoy era Action Force and the Battle Action Force comic book. Volume 2 is more of when Hasbro and Marvel UK came in.
Yes.
Is there likely to be a paperback of that version?
At the moment, there's no plans for a paperback version. I mean, look, you know, and never say never, but our kind of the terms of our license and that is kind of, you know, it's done. So I can't do any more with that unless an opportunity to renew that license kind of comes up in the future. And again, I wouldn't rule that possibility out, but it's not something that it's on the cards right now.
Possible for the future, however unlikely.
I will say there's 5 copies of the hardback available. There's only 5 copies left up on the Total Toy Books website.
Wow. Snap one up, yeah.
Space Commander, I think I know what I'm going to have to get you for Christmas. Volume 2. There's only 5 left. I'll have to snap one up.
Here's the book that you wrote with Bob Breakin.
Yes.
My Palitoy story.
That was actually a fantastic project. And that was something that myself and Bob had kind of corresponded on right back when we were working on Total Action Force The Battle Years back in 2021. And Bob was trying to get his book published, and he didn't have any success kind of going through the traditional channels. So we kind of connected, and I suggested a Kickstarter route, and it kind of grew out of that. But again, by the time Bob and I spoke, he had his first draft of that manuscript done. He'd sourced so many images. There he is, the main man himself. And again, that was a real pleasure to work with Bob, an honor, in fact, to work with Bob, bringing that book to life. It's and something I'm really super proud of that book.
Recently, you won an award for it, didn't you?
That's right. It was our print partner, the books were printed in Northern Ireland, and our print partner nominated the book for an award with the Irish Print Award. So that's kind of across the island of Ireland. And it was in the graphic design and print collaboration category, because I would have worked very closely with the printer on all of the print specifications and finishing specifications. And it picked up a silver in that category. So that was obviously that happened last month, and myself and Bob were absolutely chuffed to pick that up. So we're really, really pleased.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. That's very cool.
I'm part way through it. It's a very big tome, so I'm part way through it. But it really does go into an incredible amount of detail. Bob starts off with like the history of Palitoy back when it was Castleoid, way back in like the 1940s, and then he covers, as you say, Tressie and some of the early projects that they found success with. And then, certainly it goes into the various incarnations of Action Man, and then by way of Star Wars, we end up with Action Force.
Yes, it's it's a real, that book brings people through the entire history of Palitoy, all of the big brands that Palitoy worked on. You can see a lot of them on the front cover there.
Tremendous cover.
but it actually also pulls in the history of the toy industry itself. It's Bob was working on that for 10 years. And even, you know, while I was working on the design, I think he went through like, you know, 2 rounds of kind of serious edits where he added in more research that he had uncovered while I was kind of designing the book. So it's chock full of incredible information.
Holy moly!
Yeah, that's it. And this is an actual. So that image on the right there of the doll in the tooling, that is a photo from the Castleoid factory. So that's all Castleoid. Like that's not just like an example of any doll. That there's Castleoid specific products and factory pieces. And for people who don't know, Castleoid is the parent company that would eventually become Palitoy. So Castleoid did industrial products, but also toy products, and then they spun off the toy business as Palitoy then.
So I should reiterate to the folks watching that this is an image of a doll. This is not a baby in a horror movie, okay? It may look a little gruesome, but it's a doll. Here we go. Girls and boys love Palitoys. Oh.
Yes.
Well, that's a slogan. That's a slogan if ever I heard one. That's a winning slogan. So did you do a tour of the Palitoy factory, Brian? I know Space Commander did one recently.
I was in Leicester there at the beginning of May with Bob for the May the 4th event in the National Space Centre. And Bob did take me around to the factory with a view to kind of bringing me in for a tour. But by the time we got there, it was after the event and the place was all locked up. So the best I could do was get a few photographs from the outside. But I definitely intend to go back to Leicester and hopefully later this year. And Bob will, you know, he's offered to kind of bring me around the tour the next time I'm over. So I would really look forward to that.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to check it out too. So apparently here in Australia, though I never saw it, we had Action Force briefly before it transitioned over to G.I. Joe, but it was only the Hasbro figures. There are people that swear black and blue that they've seen them here. I never did. I only ever saw a real American hero. But the Action Force stuff, I've seen the Hasbro figures in the Action Force cards, and some of those are arguably way cooler than the G.I. Joe versions of it. How did you feel when the sculpting changed from the 5 POA action figures to what Space Commander calls the bendies? When Hasbro came into the mix.
Well, you know, we were already used to those figures anyway, because as part of Palitoy's Action Force. So here's something, right, that, again, we only discovered this working on the Volume 2 of Total Action Force. I got a chance to interview Kirk Bazigian for that book.
Oh, yes.
He was super gracious. So Kirk was obviously marketing manager or brand manager for G.I. Joe. What he revealed to me at the time in that interview was that when they created G.I. Joe, they had intended from the get-go, like when they created the 3 3/4 inch G.I. Joe, from the get-go, they wanted to market that or sell those toys internationally. Even before it became like a national kind of phenomenon in the States. So one of their biggest customers was Palitoy. They had the Action Man license, or the G.I. Joe license, you know, which was Action Man in the UK. So they immediately approached them and said, hey, we see what you're doing with your Action Force. We've got our G.I. Joe. Would you take this on as part of the license? So we're going right back to 1982 here. So what you see is from maybe some of the prototype photos that are floating around the internet of the Action Force Series 2, they very early on, they introduced the G.I. Joe vehicles and figures into that particular line. See how they could you know, revitalize Action Force, or kind of, you know, make the best value out of this kind of licensing deal that they had with Hasbro. So by the time I get into Action Force, Series 2 was already at market. So that's where you have your teams. You've got the Enemy led by Baron Ironblood. You've got Z Force, SAS Force, Space Force, and Q Force. They're your Action Force squads. So things like, even though I wasn't familiar with G.I. Joe at the time, we had the ATC, was the or the APC was the ATC. We had to bring in like the Vamp was the SAS Panther. We had the rapid fire motorcycle in Z Force.
Right.
Scarlet was repainted as Quarrel. Their laser exterminator was the HAL. Cobra Commander got a redecoed as kind of Red Laser for the Red Shadows. So the Bendies, they were already figures that I was kind of familiar with. You know, as part of, you know, I had some of those figures in my collection. And then when Palitoy kind of transferred, well, even before they transferred Action Force over to Hasbro, when they closed down their design department in 1985 or 84, I think it was, going into 1985, then Hasbro or Palitoy stopped producing any brand new Action Force, and they exclusively then took in all that Hasbro product as part of that license. So we only got, from 85 onwards, we were only getting the G.I. Joes on Palitoy Action Force cards. So I would have had, you know, characters like that line who I would have had in my collection. You know, Airborne would have been in there, Blowtorch, you know, Grunt. You know, I would have been very, very familiar with the 9 POA figures. Though I never had one of these guys. Is that Dolphin or is that
this one's Moon Dancer?
Moon Dancer. Yeah. I never had a 9 POA Moon Dancer, unfortunately. So yeah, I had a Gung Ho as well, and a, you know, Stalker. And then, of course, with the transition to Hasbro's International Heroes, all it looked like was just a refresh of the packaging to me. I didn't know that it was a completely different company now, and a whole new kind of ethos behind it, or a new universe behind it, I should say. It all just seemed like it was the same toy line, same universe, just a refresh of the logo. But shortly after that, I'd kind of migrated to 2000 AD, and I kind of took a bit of a hiatus from action figures, which lasted till I was about nearly 40.
Well, big break. I don't think I really truly ever stopped collecting. I think I just sort of kept it to myself for a little bit before it became a little bit more cool. Not that I'm never being accused of being cool. With G.I. Joe fans, there's a bit of a divide between the realistic military and then later on the more fantastical side of it. Meanwhile, Action Force has got no issues bringing out a character like this.
Yes.
In amongst all of the other ones like this guy. And this thing. What is this?
What
am I looking at?
Stingray, is it?
That's the Stingray, yeah.
Stingray.
It's a Stingray. Does the man have a name? Spacey, do you know? You'd know.
Oh, the Shark.
Shark, yeah.
So there's no issue with Shark in the Stingray going up against this fantastical creature known as the Kraken. It's a brilliant name, brilliant logo, and again, arguably cooler than the Cobra symbol, which I know they changed for Action Force. No offense to Ron Rudat, who came up with the American version of the Cobra logo, but that is a great logo, and that is an excellent action figure. And again, was there anything like any pushback on your collecting sensibilities when you see a character like this in Action Force, or are you happy to mix it all together?
Absolutely, I mixed it all together. Loved it. Absolutely loved this. I've always been a big sci-fi fan anyway, so I never had a problem with things like even, you know, before the Kraken, when we were, you know, my parents would work shift work in the same factory, right? And when my mother would be finishing one shift, my dad would have to drive out, he'd be on the next shift. We would have this kind of time at home alone.
Right.
We could be at home, like at, you know, up till midnight on our own, waiting for one of my parents to come back after finishing their shift while the other one had left. And we used to watch these kind of black and white horror movies that would be on the TV. So The Monster from the Black Lagoon was one film that I remember watching.
Oh, yes.
Totally terrified me. But I couldn't take my eyes away from it. So when the Kraken came out, I was able to make this kind of connection. This is something that I'm already familiar with.
Yeah.
So the fact and that this guy would be part of the enemy team, it's just another bad guy for Action Force to take down. So I was completely on board with that. And the one figure I never had as a kid was the Skeletron mail away figure. I never had that figure growing up, but I did. I would daydream a lot about having that figure kind of, in my collection and kind of battling against Action Force. So and now I do have one, so it all worked out.
Perfect. Actually, do you have a favorite Action Force action figure?
Oh God, I've always, in terms of my favorite looking figure, I've always loved the Red Shadows, and the Red Shadow design is just something that just captivated my attention. Like the very first time I saw one. So I would say that's my favorite figure, but my favorite character. As a kid, it was Captain Grant Campbell of Z-Force, codename Skip. But today, kind of reading the comics now, my favorite character is probably someone like either Stakeout from SAS Force or Quickfire. In fact, the two of them are two great characters.
Space Commander, do you have a favorite character or no?
Oh, I've never really been into Action Force, Certainly not science fiction.
No. You're a bit against science fiction, huh?
Yeah. I was very lucky because for years we couldn't. I know some people sometimes refer to Q-Force and Space Force as being the peg warmers, but where I grew up, that wasn't the case. So I had so much trouble finding anything Space Force. So I used to, when I was a kid, if my brother would say, "Oh, I'm this character," my other brother would say, "Oh, I'm this character," but I would always pick as like a Z-Force infantryman because he was kind of nondescript, and I still have that figure and still really enjoy it. But I always wanted Space Commander, and then finally, just as Palitoy was disintegrating, I managed to find one. But as I've shown Zazel before, oddly enough, although I bought it in Bury St Edmunds, which is in Suffolk, down in East Anglia on planet Earth, it's actually the German variant.
Oh wow!
Okay. So and you could tell it was one of the last ones going out the factory because if it had no accessories with it or anything. I've managed to get the accessories years later by way of eBay. So so the internet has done some good. But yeah.
You sent me another one of those caps, didn't you? For Space Commander. I've got two yellow caps now for my action figures.
Yes, I thought we've got some some funny little films, haven't we, Zazel, that we're working on. And
that makes it sound very dodgy. I swear it's not as bad as that sounds.
No. It's perfectly innocent. It's as innocent as middle-aged men playing with action figures can be. And I thought if we're going to have a Space Commander show up, he's got to have the right hat.
Yeah, so we do a little show called the Slaughterhouse Wrestling Championship where I make my toys wrestle. There's a little story element to it, but one of the major characters is Sergeant Slaughter, who you guys had as Sergeant Slammer.
Yes,
interesting take.
That wasn't our fault.
What to do with us?
So when you put the, sorry, go ahead.
By the time Sergeant Slammer was on the scene over here, I had probably moved on, as I say, at that stage. So I never actually had a Sergeant Slammer or Sergeant Slaughter in my collection. But I did get the opportunity to photograph Sergeant Slaughter for the Total Action Force Volume 2 book, and it's a pretty cool figure.
I agree. I own over 400 of that particular figure for crazy collecting reasons. So, are there any projects that you're currently working on?
Well, there's a lot happening at the moment. I mean, we've got the recently funded Kickstarter for David Gillis's book, More News as It's Made. So David's providing the photography. And for people who don't know, David is a big Palitoy Action Force collector and customizer, and he photographs his own kind of diorama scenes. So his book, I'm working with him to publish a book of his photography, and that's going to be out later this year. Also working with the Skeletron team on the Total Roboskull book, which basically tells the story of, yes, there we go, Wolf Trooper. So Total Roboskull will tell the story of the original Roboskull in a lot more detail than we have in the Total Action Force book, and then it'll carry that arc into the Roboskull Mark II, which is Skeletron are bringing out later this year, and it'll document all of that. Plus, it'll cover off all of any of the new toys developed as part of the Kickstarter with Skeletron. They'll all be featured in that. Loads of diorama photography, loads of artwork related to the Roboskull itself. It's going to be super book. Again, that's due out towards the end of the year. And then, of course, what the biggest project that I'm working on right now, which I'm super excited about, going back to those licenses that we spoke about earlier, with Hasbro and Rebellion, the project I'm working on right now is reprinting the original Action Force comics from the 1980s, which have never been reprinted since their original publication. So they're more than 40 years out of print. They're coming back. There we go. There's a classic right there. They're going to be coming back. So we'll be putting out the first 3 volumes. Again, at the end of this year, they'll be coming out. The physical copies will be out, but we will be launching a pre-order much sooner, because it is, as with everything that Total Toy Books does, it's they are kind of niche, small quantity, limited edition runs. And while the Battle Action Force comics will probably have more volume than some of the other books we've done in the past, they still will be limited. So the pre-sale is going to go live, I'll just say soon. I can't reveal the date just yet, but it will be soon. And what I would be saying to people is head over to the totaltoybooks.com, sign up to the mailing list there, and people on the mailing list will be the first to know about the pre-sale when that launches.
Done. I'll put the link in the description of this video. Do make sure, if you guys are checking it out, you can also check out that Star Wars for free. So what I recommend you do is this.
Check it out one time, won't you?
There he is again.
Check it out. There's lots of cool stuff happening over there. And you said there was only 5 copies left of Volume 2?
Volume 2, yes. So it's almost gone. And
Volume 1 is out of... We got more.
Volume 1, hardback edition of Volume 1 has been out of print now for over a year. But we still have a few copies of the softback edition available there, which actually, what some people may not know is that the softback edition is actually a 2nd edition, so it has more content in there than what was initially included in Volume 1. So when we did the first Kickstarter for Volume 1, we had some stretch goals, which unfortunately didn't get unlocked. So when we brought it back to Kickstarter to fund the softback edition, we just built one of those stretch goals into the actual starter level, basic level itself. So we were able to get an extra 16 pages of content in there. So that's a little bit more kind of history, and some more diorama photos in there too.
Cool. I met David Gillis. Well, I've met him a couple of times actually. I've met him up in Colville for the 40th anniversary. But yes. He was also at the Birmingham NEC just recently.
Yes,
he's a real nice guy, very talented, and it's funny because of Zazel and I sometimes on our little show here we'll refer to a special project. This is something we've been working on for the original version of it. I was working on 15-20 years ago, but we've since meeting Zazel, we've breathed new life into it. And
yes, that's true.
Yeah, and so that's touch wood, that should still go ahead. But when Dave Gillis, when it was announced his book, More News As It's Made, which looks fantastic, and I like the using the tagline from the Palitoy adverts.
Yes.
I contacted Zazel. I was like, Zazel, this dude's just stolen our milkshake. Because his idea, at first I thought his idea was almost identical to what we were doing, but having looked at it, I can see it is different. It is different. I'm not mad at Dave. I'm looking forward to the book. Having seen that it can be done, Zazel and I are looking more and more closely at the special project, and maybe that'll happen eventually. Maybe Dave
really
can give us some
exciting.
tips. Sorry, say again?
That's really exciting. That sounds really exciting.
I'm hoping it is. I'm hoping it is.
Space Commander's very passionate about Action Force. It's very good writer. He's a very good writer. I can't even get a sentence out, but he's a very good writer, and he has a very strong passion for this story that he wants to be told. And if I'm able to do anything in that regard, I would happily do so to get Space Commander's vision out there. And the good thing about imagination is that there's plenty to play with, and lots of room for everyone. But Brian, I've got a question, and forgive my ignorance if this has already happened and I just don't know about it. But is there anything creatively that is from your mind, your ideas that you wanted to put out there in print or some other form or fashion?
Oh, wow. Well, you know, I have a list of projects that I want to do, and you know, given enough time, I will get to all of them. And some of those are, you know, could be like personal projects, like the Star Wars book. There is, you know, I really love, you know, photography is a big part of what I do. Even though, you know, I do more kind of traditional design as well. The photography is a big thing for me. So working with different toy lines, you know, again, whether it's Action Force or G.I. Joe or something completely different. I love, you know, creating photos that are very dynamic, very action packed. I'm trying to get my photography to a point where it looks as dynamic and as exciting as the comics that I used to read growing up. And when you see some of those kind of panels in the Battle comic, Battle Action Force, you know, one panel could say so much and do so much in terms of action, and I'm trying to get all of that into my into my photography, and that's kind of an ongoing journey, you know, as a creative goal to become to get the photography up to that level. But in terms of books, there's a lot of other books in the pipeline that I can't really get into them now, but when I can, I will be, you know, more than happy to kind of reveal and make a lot of noise about them.
Perfect. Do you have many challenges in as far as photography is concerned when you're trying to get a dynamic pose out of a 5 POA figure? I mean, this guy's pretty expressive on his own, but there are certain limitations on what he can do. No fault of your own there, Kraken, but I'm the same way. There's many poses I can't do, and I'll put that down to age. But how difficult would it be to put something 5 POA into an action shot, trying to recreate something from the comic book, which is obviously free drawn and quite dynamic?
Well, you know, you're never going to be able to get, you know, an exact kind of pose, replicate an exact pose, but you're trying to capture the spirit of those kind of dynamics. So things like lighting, camera angles, and then using the limited posability of the figure, like all those kind of tools, they're all kind of assets in your kind of creative arsenal to try and make it come together. And really the Star Wars project that we talked about earlier, that was the project where I started to get good as a photographer. I think, you know, some of the books that I had done prior to that, like say Total Retaliation, the photography on that was at the time I thought that was great, but like I wouldn't consider that photography by any means kind of good now, you know, compared to where I'm at now. and that Star Wars project forced me to work with really, really tight constraints. And it was, you know, in that kind of working environment for 4 years, the just grinding the whole time. Like the book that's online that you can flick through, that's got maybe 390 photos in it. But I took thousands of photos in that time period, like thousands. You know, one shot, there could be like 30, 40, 50 shots where it's just refining, and then getting it to say, okay, I'm kind of happy with that. And then the next day coming back going, I don't like it, set it up again and go again at it, 30, 40 shots. So it ended up like there was maybe over 4,000 photos taken in that time period. Distilled down to that small selection that's online now. So it's that kind of creative process. It kind of helped me to get to where I'm at now as a photographer. One of my favorite photos in the Volume 2 book is the photo with backstop, kind of going up against a Cobra mole pod. And my friend Stephen Kelly, who's most of his collection is featured in that Total Action Force Volume 2 book, said to me that was one of the highest compliments I could get. He said, you've taken kind of a nothing figure and made him into like a kind of a superhero. So
right.
it was pretty tough to get that feedback from Stephen.
So I guess it's... Go on, Spacey.
I was just going to say, even with the 5 POA figures, with a bit of love and attention, you can really look how great that looks. I mean, this guy, he's clearly running. He's got backup following. And yet he doesn't have bendable knees, but they've still managed to make it work.
That is tremendous.
That's one of my favorite shots in the whole book. Is that one?
I love that photo as well. That's that's, you know, and the skyscrapers in the background. That's just IKEA packaging inserts. So that's it for people who aren't familiar with my photography. All my dioramas are just really simple stuff that I just find lying around. There's no complicated building or model making skills needed. It's just trying to work with really simple props, nice lighting and nice colors.
And then let the action figures speak for themselves.
Let them do the hard work.
Yeah. They can do the heavy lifting. Speaking of heavy lifting, Space Commander, obviously I've faked my way through this whole thing thinking I know even a semblance of Action Force, but really I only know but a fraction. But Spacey, have you got any final questions or thoughts or anything you want to throw at Brian before we leave?
No, I think we've covered most things. But one of the things I find fascinating about Action Force in the present day, here we are recording this in 2024. Although, like you say, it is niche in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, it certainly is. But when you think, you know, Action Force went into production in 1981. It was first released in January 1982. Then by 1987, Hasbro had taken over. By 1990, they dropped the name Action Force and was just using G.I. Joe. And yet here we are, 34 years later, brand new books coming out, courtesy of Brian down here, our gentleman guest. We've got just the other day, Zazel and I discovered D&M Games.
Oh yes!
Yay! Look at that.
We've got some of these. These will be covered in a future episode of Incoming Transmission. We've got Robo Skull.
Yes.
What's happening? Who else have we got? We got. Jim Marshall from, as you mentioned earlier, bloodforthebaron.com. He's still toiling away. We've got Action Figure Essentials on eBay. You know, they're making repro stickers so that you can either replace your old stickers on your old vehicles, or if you buy a re-released vehicle, you can make it look old school instead of having the new version. That was cool. More Action Figure Essentials. And you know, we mentioned Dave Gillis earlier with his customs and his photography. Matt Paul, Kraken Creations. I ordered something from Matt just the other day. There's so many people involved in this hobby and are really passionate about it. and are finding new ways to continue it. I think it's fascinating.
I love that you bring that up, and you know what? We had this tiny window where Action Force was available in the 80s. I mean, it was a tiny window, but the toys and the comics were so good that they just left this lasting impression on the kids who played with them. But here we are today, you know, 40 years on, and more and more people are finding out about this toy line and kind of going, hang on a sec, this looks interesting. And of course they are, because they were so good for what they were at the time. So it's, I think it's a great time to be an Action Force fan.
Oh, yes.
There's loads of great stuff out there. You've got like little independent makers out there kind of doing stuff. There's licensed products starting to get out there now. And I would be hopeful that, you know, given enough kind of time, enough momentum, there'll be even more licensed material getting out there. And it really is. It's a super time to be an Action Force fan.
Even Super 7 have jumped in and bringing out some Action Force colored variants of our favorite G.I. Joe characters, using the appropriate names and everything for their Action Force counterparts, which I think is not only is it mind-blowing, but it's probably the most appropriate use of their 5 POA format, is putting the old bendies that were the original G.I. Joe and throwing them back into 5 POA, which is what Action Force started out as. It's a great mix there too. I think there's actually maybe more Action Force stuff out there now than you could probably get for G.I. Joe in the market right now. As far as, you know, different variants of things, books, action figures, the Skeletron guys, that continuing their story with that particular brand, with the Robo Skull. Oh, how cool is that?
That Robo Skull Mark II. I mean, I've had the prototype in hand, and it is amazing. I mean, the original Robo Skull is also amazing, but the Robo Skull Mark II is, you know, I would get one. Just get one, because you won't regret it. It's amazing.
All right, well, Brian, I want to thank you for joining us on Incoming Transmission. Do please come back. I'll do some more homework, and maybe I'll actually know a little bit more about Action Force. Every little bit goes into the memory banks. I have to push out something I don't need to remember anymore to put some new stuff in. But as an older collector of lifelong collector of G.I. Joe, going back and collecting Action Force stuff now, thanks to my buddy Space Commander, I'm a 40-something enjoying this stuff for the first time, and I can only imagine what it would have been like collecting it as a kid. Mind-blowing, I'm sure. But thanks, Brian. I appreciate spending this time with us.
Thank you, guys. So glad to come on and chat Action Force. And you know what? Anytime, I'd be more than happy to come back. It's one of my passions to talk about. So it's I feel like I'm in good company here.
Well, when you got a guy dressed as Space Commander, I mean, there's a little bit of something there. Yeah, well, hang on, cadet and a cadet in the making. Well, on that note, I'm going to try and get some sleep. I appreciate all the time you guys have spent with me today. If you're watching this, do check the links, because you'll be able to go to that website as discussed. There's probably only going to be 4 more books, because I think Space Commander is going to get one for Christmas. So check out that, and the soft cover Volume 1 still available. A few handful copies of Volume 2, and the Star Wars currently for free and available on Brian's website. Link in the description. With that, we'll say full force and good night.
Full force, guys. Good night.
Full force.